The screen fades in from black, and at first there is silence. Then comes the faint, rising hum of cicadas. The camera floats above a sea of endless green. The Amazon rainforest stretching as far as the eye can see. An ocean of trees trembling under the humid wind. Wisps of mist curl above the canopy like smoke drifting from invisible fires. A river coils through it like a black serpent, glinting faintly under a bruised sky heavy with storm clouds. The view sinks lower, deeper, until the green swallows. Everything, the light dimming, the sound changing. Parrots scream somewhere distant. Frogs croak from the shadows. Drops of rain fall from leaf to leaf like liquid beads trickling down layers of glass. Finally, the camera settles on a muddy path where two sets of footprints march side by side into the darkness of the trees. Until suddenly, they stop. No turn, no stumble, no return. Just an ending, as if the forest had swallowed them in a single breath. A voice cuts through the stillness, slow and chilling. The rainforest holds a million secrets. For two young backpackers, it became the place where their footsteps simply ended. The screen cuts to black. Thunder cracks in the distance. The Amazon is no ordinary place. To outsiders, it is a dream destination, a wilderness to conquer, a box to tick off on an adventure list. But for those who live here, it is something else entirely, older, crueler, alive in ways few can comprehend. The air is heavy with moisture, so thick it feels like breathing through wet cloth. The days scorch, the heat pressing against your skin like hot iron, while the nights steal warmth until your bones shiver. Everything here fights for survival, and in that brutal order. Humans are not at the top. Snakes the length of boats lie coiled beneath branches, eyes unblinking in the shadows. Spiders the size of palms crawl silently across bark. Parasites float invisible in the rivers, waiting for a single careless sip of water. The jungle dazzles with color and life, yet beneath its beauty runs a constant undercurrent of danger. Locals tell stories of trickster spirits with backward feet who lure travelers away until they collapse from exhaustion. Hunters warn of ghostly lights drifting above the rivers at night, leading boats astray into whirlpools and hidden banks. And sometimes in the thick silence, people claim they hear whispers, too human to be wind, too unnatural to be real. It was into this world that two young backpackers stepped. They were in their early 20s, restless and fearless, searching for something beyond the ordinary. One carried a camera everywhere, obsessed with capturing untouched places, always chasing the perfect shot. The other carried a notebook, their words filled with the excitement of exploration, eager to share their stories with a small online following. To their families, they were dreamers, bright, adventurous, a little reckless, but full of hope. Their social media showed their joy in the days before they vanished. Captions read, "Into the green abyss. No Wi-Fi, no noise, just us in the jungle." Photos of their grins, new boots, brightly colored rain jackets, and the tent strapped to their packs painted the image of excitement and invincibility. They looked ready for anything, though they weren't. When they arrived in a riverside town that served as the gateway to the forest, they checked into a peeling old hostel where hammocks swayed lazily in the heat. Other travelers remembered their curiosity. They didn't ask about popular trails or guided tours. They wanted to know about hidden paths, places no one else went. That evening, they wandered the docks, laughing as they asked questions of the fishermen. When someone mentioned an old forgotten trail once used by rubber tappers, one no longer recommended, their eyes lit up. It was exactly what they wanted. The next morning, they stocked up. Bottled water, instant noodles, bug spray, and even a machete bought from a corner shop. The shopkeeper remembered them clearly, foreigners who smiled through broken Spanish, laughing like their journey was just a camping trip. Later, they convinced a boatman to take them across the wide, muddy river to the trailhead. He said they were in high spirits, snapping photos of each other as the boat cut through the water. Before stepping off into the mud, They waved, promising they'd return in 2 days. He never saw them again. That night, villagers spotted them on the dirt road, backpacks swaying heavily as they disappeared toward the green wall of trees. Their pace was quick, eager. They looked like any other couple chasing adventure, too caught up in their excitement to notice the eyes that might have been watching. The following day, silence. No call home, no message, no update. Before leaving, they had promised their families they would check in once they were back in town. Hours stretched into days. Their families waited, refreshing their phones, their inboxes, but nothing came. Stories emerged later. A shop clerk remembered them buying fuel canisters. Another traveler swore they had seen a similar pair heading up a trail, though they couldn't agree on the direction. Some villagers whispered they had heard distant screams one night, echoing faintly across the river. No one went to look. In the Amazon, strange noises were nothing new. Days later, hunters moving through the forest stumbled upon a campsite. A tent stood ripped open, its fabric slashed as though by claws or knives. Inside, food was neatly packed, bottles of water lined up, untouched. But the backpacks were gone. The pair were nowhere in sight. No bodies, no blood. Just emptiness. The forest had erased them. The screen fades again. The hum of insects the only sound left. The narrator's voice returns, quieter, almost trembling. For weeks, no one could explain what happened to them. But the jungle keeps its secrets well, and what would later be found was far more disturbing than anyone imagined. Search teams were not immediately called. At first, there was just worry. The families back home sent messages, their words piling up unanswered. Friends tagged them online, asking if they were safe. Then came silence so long it began to feel heavy. By the third day, when the boatman who had dropped them off realized they hadn't returned, concern finally turned into alarm. He went to the police, his voice uneasy as he explained that the couple hadn't come back from the trail. The officer on duty shrugged at first. Foreigners disappeared in the jungle more often than people wanted to admit. Sometimes they got lost. Sometimes they returned weeks later, thin but smiling, with stories of survival. And sometimes they didn't return at all. But the families refused to wait. Calls were made, embassies alerted, and soon an official search was launched. Boats pushed out along the riverbanks, their motors churning through the muddy water. Local volunteers moved in lines through the forest, machetes hacking vines, calling the couple's names into the damp silence. Their voices echoed strangely, swallowed almost instantly by the endless green. The searchers pushed deeper, sweating under the wet heat, their boots sinking into mud that clung like glue. Every step was a battle. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds. Ants bit until blood rose on the skin. Branches clawed at arms and faces. The rainforest itself fought against the rescue attempt. Sudden downpours came like walls of water, flooding the trails and wiping away any sign of human passage. Small creeks turned into rivers overnight. The footprints, if there ever were any, melted into the earth. Radios crackled and failed, their signals blocked by the thick canopy. Men wandered in circles, realizing too late that they had been led back to where they had started. Still, they pressed on. For a week, they searched. Dogs were brought in, their noses lifting, their bodies tense. But the scents twisted and vanished in the humid air. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades cutting the mist, scanning the endless roof of trees for any sign of flash of color. A waving hand, a piece of fabric caught in the branches. Nothing. The jungle gave them nothing. The families arrived. Soon after, their faces pale with exhaustion and hope clinging by a thread. Mothers and fathers stood on the banks of the river, staring at the forest wall as if trying to will it to open up and return their children. Interviews were given to reporters, their voices shaking. They are strong. They are adventurous. They will come back. But the villagers who stood silently behind them knew the truth was never that simple here. The Amazon had claimed many lives before, and most of the time, the forest did not give them back. Rumors began to spread. Some locals muttered that the couple had angered the spirits of the forest, stepping onto paths that no outsider was meant to tread. Others whispered of drug traffickers who used hidden routes in the jungle, men who would not hesitate to make intruders disappear. And still others claimed darker things, that the rainforest itself wanted them, that it marked certain people and drew them in, never letting them leave. Then, after nearly 2 weeks, hunters from a small village came forward with something. They had been moving through the forest, following animal trails, when they stumbled on an abandoned campsite. A torn tent, a few scattered belongings. The rescuers rushed to the location, and though the sight chilled them, it was what they found nearby that changed everything. Buried under leaves and mud, half hidden in the damp earth, was a small black camera. The casing was scratched, water had seeped inside, but the memory card was still intact. When the authorities first scrolled through its contents, they expected to find ordinary travel photo shots of smiling faces against the green, snapshots of rivers and trees. At first, that's exactly what appeared. Bright pictures of the couple, their clothes still clean, their smiles wide, as they set off into the jungle. They looked happy. They looked alive. But as the photos continued, the mood began to shift. The smiles faded. The clothes became dirty, soaked. The shots grew darker, taken deeper under the canopy where the light barely touched the ground. Some photos were blurry, tilted, as if taken in a rush. Then came a sequence of images that no one could explain, strange angles of the treetops. The ground, their own faces looking pale and frightened. And in one of the last photos, something else. The picture showed the jungle at night, lit only by the flash of the camera. In the far corner of the frame, among the trees, there appeared to be something. A figure, blurred, watching. The camera clicked off. The screen goes black, and the narrator's voice lowers to a whisper. Whatever happened to them? The answers might already be hidden in those photographs, but the truth would prove darker than anyone imagined. The photographs spread like wildfire. Investigators pored over them in dim offices, their faces lit by the cold glow of computer screens. Families clutched printed copies, tracing the edges with trembling fingers. Online, the images leaked, each one dissected by strangers across the world. Some insisted they saw nothing unusual, just trees, shadows, branches twisted by the cameras. Flash. Others swore the blurred shapes were not tricks of the forest, but something else, something alive, something watching. But beyond the mystery of the figure, there was something even stranger: the timeline of the pictures. The last known photos of the couple, taken during daylight, were dated almost a week after they were supposed to have returned from their hike. The implication was chilling. They hadn't vanished immediately. They had survived. They had wandered. And in those days of silence, as search parties combed the wrong areas, they were still out there, somewhere fighting to stay alive. Experts studied the images, pointing out details easily missed. In one photo, the woman's face was streaked with mud, her eyes wide and exhausted. In another, the man's arm appeared bandaged with a torn piece of fabric, though no one knew why. In several pictures, the ground looked uneven, as if they were near ravines or cliffs. And in the final sequence, most haunting of all, the camera seemed to be used not for memory, but for survival. Flashes fired into the darkness again and again, illuminating nothing but trees, branches, and endless black. It was as if they were trying to see something or scare something away. Theories erupted. Some said they had been stalked by animals, perhaps a jaguar or a large snake. But seasoned hunters pointed out that the Amazon's predators rarely lingered so close without striking. Others believed the couple had stumbled across something human: illegal camps hidden in the forest, where intruders would never be allowed. To leave, the blurred figure in the photo became the centerpiece of every conversation. Was it a person? A hunter? A local guide? Or something else entirely? Authorities attempted to retrace their steps. Using the metadata from the camera, search teams pushed into new parts of the jungle, areas far deeper than the original sweep had covered. It was dangerous work. Trails ended suddenly in swamps. Venomous snakes coiled in the undergrowth. One rescuer fell ill from a fever so violent it nearly killed him. Still, they pressed on, driven by the hope that the photographs meant there was still something to find. Then, weeks later, the breakthrough came. Not far from where the camera had been found, villagers stumbled on a torn backpack lodged between tree roots. Inside were more belongings: a phone, a water bottle, a pair of sunglasses. The phone was badly damaged, its screen cracked, but when technicians examined it, they discovered a handful of recordings. Like the photographs, they began normally casual clips of the forest, the couple laughing, joking, filming each other. But the later files grew unnerving. The footage shook with frantic movements, the sound of heavy breathing, whispers in the dark. In the background, faint but undeniable, were noises no one could explain: snapping branches, the sound of footsteps. Not their own, and once, something like a distant voice calling from the trees. The families begged for answers, but each discovery only deepened the nightmare. Why had they wandered so far from their planned route? Who or what was near them in those final days? And why had the jungle seemed to swallow every trace until the hunters stumbled upon that camera by chance? The narrator's voice drops again, low and tense. Pieces of the puzzle were beginning to surface, each one stranger than the last. But the darkest revelations were still waiting, buried in the heart of the Amazon, where truth and myth blur together, and survival can turn into something unrecognizable. The camera lingers on the haunting night photo, the faint blurred figure among the trees. Before fading to black dot, the forest no longer felt like a place of life. It felt like a labyrinth of secrets. By the time searchers returned to the jungle with the new evidence, the case had become an international obsession. Families arrived from abroad, clutching photographs, begging locals for help, offering money to anyone who might have seen the missing couple. Reporters descended on nearby towns, turning quiet riverside villages into chaotic camps of cameras and questions. But the jungle itself resisted every intrusion. Days began with a blinding sun, the air heavy with heat so thick it pressed on the chest, and ended with storms that drowned equipment and turned paths into rivers of mud. Helicopters hovered above the canopy but found nothing but endless green. On the ground, teams hacked through vines and thorned undergrowth, only to circle back to where they had started. Compasses failed, radios cut out, and more than once. Rescuers admitted they felt as though the forest was leading them in circles. The belongings found in the backpack were examined in detail. Among them, a journal surfaced with a few scattered entries written in shaky handwriting. The early notes were filled with enthusiasm, plans for routes, sketches of birds and trees. But the last page chilled investigators. It contained only fragmented words, almost incoherent. Lost, noise at night. Not alone. And beneath that, a final line that trailed off mid-sentence, as though interrupted. Hope mingled with dread. If the couple had survived for days, maybe longer, why had no one stumbled upon them? Some locals whispered that the jungle itself chose who could leave and who could not. Elders spoke of spirits that lured wanderers off the path, of voices that imitated loved ones, drawing travelers deeper into the green until they vanished forever. To outsiders, these were just stories. But for those who lived on the edge of the Amazon, the fear was real. Investigators pressed villagers for answers, but rumors only multiplied. Some claimed to have heard cries in the night echoing across the river. Others said they saw campfire smoke deep in the forest, though no one dared to approach. A hunter confessed, in hushed tones, that he had once followed strange tracks that ended abruptly, as if the footsteps had simply stopped, swallowed by the earth dot. And then came the most disturbing discovery. A few miles from the spot where the backpack was recovered, searchers found a pair of shoes. They were badly worn, caked with mud, and one had a dark stain along the fabric that tests later confirmed was blood. Nearby, caught in the roots of a tree, was a strip of torn clothing. Both items were identified as belonging to the missing woman. The jungle had finally given up more pieces, but not answers. Families wept, clinging to hope that these were signs of survival rather than confirmation of death. But privately, some investigators admitted the evidence suggested a darker fate. Still, without bodies, without final proof, the mystery remained unsolved. The camera pans across the vast canopy, endless and suffocating, before focusing again on the haunting image of the journal's last words. The narrator whispers, the forest was no longer just a backdrop to their disappearance. It had become a living character in the story, an entity that held on tightly to its secrets. The screen fades to black with a single sound lingering, the crack of a branch somewhere deep in the night. When the jungle finally revealed its most unsettling secret, it came not with shouts of discovery, but with the quiet tread of hunters returning from a week-long expedition. In their hands, wrapped carefully in cloth, was a battered camera, its casing scarred, its buttons worn. They claimed it had been found near a dry riverbed, hidden beneath a tangle of branches, as though someone had placed it there deliberately. The families rushed forward, desperate for any clue, but it was the investigators who powered it on, hearts racing as the first images flickered across the tiny, dim screen. What they saw did not bring clarity. It only deepened the nightmare. The earliest photos were harmless, almost joyful. Smiling faces under the towering trees, the couple posing together with backpacks slung over their shoulders, sunlight streaming through the canopy. The kind of photos every traveler takes, the kind that should have ended up in albums, not police files. But then, the tone shifted. Later images showed them hiking deeper, sweat streaking their faces, exhaustion creeping into their smiles. And then the photographs grew stranger. Blurred shots of treetops at night, flash-illuminated images of tangled vines, branches, and roots. Empty frames of pitch-black darkness, where only the faint gleam of eyes seemed to stare back from the shadows. One picture, burned forever into memory, showed the young woman standing in a clearing, her expression unsettled, as if listening to something behind the camera. Another revealed a footprint, bare, large, not belonging to either of them, stamped deep into the mud beside their trail. Investigators argued endlessly over the meaning of these images. Were they documenting their own fear, leaving behind evidence in case they didn't survive? Or had someone else been with them in the jungle? The final images were the most disturbing. Taken long after the couple should have been alive, they seemed almost frantic. Dozens of shots snapped in rapid succession, many of nothing but darkness and foliage, as if the photographer's hands were trembling. One chilling photo captured the forest floor with a torn piece of clothing visible, eerily similar to the fabric found days earlier. The very last image showed nothing but the canopy above, branches crisscrossing against the night sky. Yet there was something unnatural about it. Some investigators swore they could make out a faint silhouette among the trees, a shape that did not belong. Forensics analyzed the camera, and the metadata revealed something even more chilling. The final set of photographs were time-stamped days after the couple was believed to have disappeared, which meant someone or something was still using the camera long after their expected survival window had passed. Speculation consumed the investigation. Had they been stalked? Captured? Was the camera left behind intentionally, a silent cry for help? Or had someone else placed it where it was found, as a message or perhaps a warning? Families recoiled at the images, torn between the hope that their children had survived longer than anyone believed, and the horror of what those last days must have been like. Reporters sensationalized the story, plastering the eerie photographs across headlines, fueling theories that ranged from human predators lurking in the Amazon to supernatural forces guarding its secrets. And through it all, one question hung, heavier than any other. If the couple did not take the final photographs themselves, then who was behind the lens? The narration lowers, almost to a whisper. In the heart of the jungle, a camera told a story, but it was a story without an ending. The images gave us fragments of truth, but also hints of something far darker than anyone could explain. The scene fades to the sound of camera shutters clicking in the darkness, each flash lighting up the jungle for a fraction of a second, never long enough to see what might be standing just beyond the trees. The world leaned in as investigators tried to stitch together the fragments of truth from the photographs, from scattered belongings, from whispers in the jungle. But the deeper they dug, the more disturbing the story became. The final breakthrough came not from the dense bureaucracy of officials, but from quiet confessions whispered in riverside villages. Hunters spoke of hearing cries at night, deep in the rainforest, voices carried on the wind. Others told of strangers who had passed through the region around the time of the disappearance, armed men who did not belong, who avoided questions, who seemed to vanish just as quickly as they had appeared. Files long buried emerged, reports of disappearances eerily similar, tourists who had strayed into places they should not have, locals who vanished without word. The camera wasn't the first object retrieved from the forest. It was simply the first to find its way into headlines. Piece by piece, the truth took shape. The couple had strayed too far, following a path not marked on their maps, a trail that locals avoided. Something or someone had been following them. The frantic photographs were not accidents. They were signals, messages, perhaps desperate attempts to capture proof of their stalkers, or to leave behind a breadcrumb trail in case anyone ever found the camera. The horrific last days of their journey came into focus, hunger gnawing at them, exhaustion breaking their will, fear of being hunted growing stronger with every rustle in the trees. The jungle, once a place of wonder, had become their prison. And then, silenced out why the case was left to rot for so long, was another layer of tragedy. There were files that could have led to faster answers, witnesses who had been ignored, voices drowned in bureaucracy. Families had been told to move on, to accept the official story of an unfortunate accident. But the evidence pointed elsewhere toward a truth that was too unsettling, too politically dangerous, to ever fully acknowledge. When the final reports were presented to the families, grief erupted into anger. They demanded accountability, demanded to know why warnings had been ignored, why evidence had been left to gather dust, why it had taken hunters, not officials, to uncover the most vital clue. Mothers wept over the photos, fathers clenched fists in silence. Friends who had once laughed with them stared at their smiling faces in the early pictures, unable to reconcile them with the nightmare that followed. And yet, even with all the revelations, the truth remained incomplete. No bodies were ever found, no definitive proof of who or what was responsible. Just shadows, just questions, just the photographs, glowing like faint echoes of lives that should have continued, but DIDN single quotes T. The camera, now stored in a police archive, sits like a cursed relic. Investigators say they sometimes refuse to look at the last image for too long. The canopy, the faint silhouette, the suggestion that someone was watching. The narrator's voice slows, lingering over the final words. Some mysteries end with closure. Others end with silence. And some, like this one, leave us trapped in between, caught between what we know and what we fear might still be out there. The camera pans upward, through the dense Amazon canopy, into endless green stretching to the horizon. The forest hums with unseen life, the sound of insects, of rustling leaves, of distant water. And then silence. A single shutter click echoes, The screen fades to black, and the final words appear. If you want more chilling mysteries like this one, subscribe. And remember, the world is still full of places where answers are swallowed whole.